Hello everyone and welcome to week 5. A few key points I wanted to cover to make sure we have good clarity and understanding of them. First and foremost, the concept of stretching when it comes to challenging concepts. And by challenging, we mean not necessarily you don't understand it, but want to make sure, however, the concepts are clear. So when we speak about them, we are clear on similar terminology and similar ideas as it relates to the concept. Stretching. Dynamic is moving, right? Static is not moving. Now, static or dynamic stretching could be performed both either in the warm-up and or the cool-down, and that is fine. Although the concept of warming up or cooling down, in essence, is really movement. So what we really have is if we're going to do static stretching at all and add it into warm-up or cool-down, it's part of the process, but you're really not warming up or cooling down by statically stretching. That needs to be understood. Secondly, when it comes to static stretching by itself does not limit muscular force production. I know some research studies say that, but you have to really look closely at those studies. Sometimes it happens with a lot of studies, or I should say whenever we talk about those studies, we make gross generalizations about them without understanding it. Static stretching by itself does not necessarily inhibit muscular force production unless the stretch is held for a long period, which means essentially 45-60 seconds or more. And it still might not. It may decrease muscular force production. Don't say static stretching inhibits the muscle force production. That's not necessarily true. 20-30 seconds has never been shown to decrease substantial muscular force production. There's nothing wrong with doing static stretching prior to exercise. It simply needs to be understood that when you're doing static stretching first, your primary goal in that moment is to loosen the muscle you're trying to stretch. If that's your primary goal, there's nothing wrong with doing that. If your primary goal is to activate that muscle, perhaps statically stretching it right before going into an activity may not be the best idea. But we have to be careful about the gross generalizations that we come to sometimes with some of the studies that are trying to give us ideas, not necessarily making sweeping points that are always going to be the case. And when it comes to stretching, or the concept of, I'm not sure what happened to my little PowerPoint there. I'm going to stick with this. Warm up versus the cool down. When you're warming up, we're getting ready for activity. But it's not just getting ready for activity and increasing body temperature and increasing blood circulation. That's true. But what we really have is we're trying to increase force production, increase muscular force production, and increase work capacity. If you warm up properly, what you get is the right muscle fibers firing at the right time, so in the right sequence, getting the proper coordination, getting the proper activity, such that it's actually less effort required to produce significant force, and you can produce work for longer periods. That is the goal of the warm-up, which could be as little as 3 to 5 minutes for a power type workout, or as much as 10 to 15 minutes or so for, or even 20 minutes on the higher end for other type programs such as endurance-related focus, or someone who's on the lower end of readiness for sport activity needs more time in the warm-up, or if it's particularly cold out. That's another reason to go longer in the warm-up. Cool down, typically speaking, it's often referred to as a 10 to 15 minute time frame, can always go longer. Once again, the goal is to return the body toward homeostasis. Okay, getting the body to recover. That is the goal of the cool down. If you don't do the cool down, you're decreasing the probability of the athlete recovering. It doesn't necessarily mean the person's going to get injured. It doesn't necessarily mean the person won't be able to perform at all. But it does mean you're increasing the likelihood performance will not be the same in the next 24 hours or so because you haven't done the proper cool down. If the proper cool down is not performed on a regular basis, you're going to be limiting some response performance-wise. And you won't really know because you haven't had any chance to try to see what would happen by doing it with that same athlete and then not do it with that same athlete. That's why it's always hard. But research will show that cool down is vital for ensuring longer-term performance, longer-term, not necessarily short-term, and decreasing actual muscle stiffness by up to 60 to 70%. That's an important factor. Okay, and when you're actually noting in your posts about, when I say intensity, when we talk about measure intensity, the fourth point on this PowerPoint here, measure intensity, I really want you to talk about 3 different things. Heart rate, generally speaking, where you expect the heart rate to be, maybe it's 30%, 40%, 60%, 80%. Not expecting you to be right, but I want you to be clear about in your mind what you think your athlete should be at. If they're doing push-ups, heart rate's going to be probably 30, 40%. But if they're running hard, it's going to be 70, 80, possibly 90%. Depends on the activity, right? You might want to try it out for yourself and kind of recognize where your heart rate response is as it relates to intensity in any given exercise. Because heart rate, without taking blood, which would be the ideal, to determine hormonal response, an actual physiological response during activity, or an EMG measuring muscular response, the best thing we have as far as objective recognition of intensity is the heart rate. You should be doing that with every single set. And when the set finishes, what was your heart rate right now? Take a 6-second snapshot, add a 0 to it, so you actually have the person's heart rate right then. Otherwise, ideally having heart rate monitors on every athlete. That would be the ideal, but not necessarily the most practical, right? Measuring intensity otherwise, RPE. On a scale 1 to 10, you should already have an idea in your head before every exercise that includes warm-up and includes cool-down. Warming up should be somewhere between 4 to a 7, maybe as high as an 8 RPE, but that's a little high for warming up, starting around 4 and finishing around 6 or 7, but making that clear, telling your athletes that, and making it clear in your posts. And the cool-down is the opposite. Starting to cool down around 7 or 8, somewhere in there, and maybe even 9, that would be unusual. Bringing it down closer to the 4 by the time you finish out, which goes along with the lines of the theoretical percent max as far as effort or output goes. You want to be thinking about the RPE being the same level. That's the theoretical ideal. Perfect world, the perception of effort is low and the actual output is high. That is the goal. The goal is not to have a high perception of output with an actual low force output. That is the worst case scenario, and that is a nightmare for a coach or a trainer or any sport-related performance type activity. As far as lactate versus lactic acid, lactate production will increase as the exercise intensity increases. Lactic acid is not something you can feel. Lactic acid is not something we're trying to remove. It's excess lactate that we're trying to remove. Excess waste products, excess hydrogen ions when it comes to the cool down, when it comes to the recovery, when it comes to rest between sets and rest between days. So I want to make sure you understand the basic differentiation between those two concepts when you mention them in your posts or possibly your paper, and of course ongoing concepts with your training and coaching in the months to come. As far as heart rate response, the primary goal of a activity is the performance itself. That's the primary goal. We use the heart rate and the RPE and the percent max as recognition of what we expect to see when it comes to the actual output. Goal output, we should never be the goal of getting the heart rate up. That is not the goal. The goal is higher performance. And you can pretty much expect that in a given exercise, if you have 10, 12, 15 athletes or more, the person who's performing at the highest level probably also has the lowest heart rate at that same level of output. They're probably faster, or they can go for longer, or they need less time in recovery, and they probably have the lowest heart rate. That is the goal. The goal is not to get the heart rate up. It never should be, and that's often misrepresented in a lot of information. It's just not true. I want the heart rate to be lower. It's okay if it goes up. That is okay. Of course, the primary goal at the end of the exercise set is to see that heart rate response go down, heart rate go down. What we're really talking about with the heart rate is we're talking about the contraction and relaxation of the heart, right? Ventricular contraction and relaxation, blood filling, and then blood being pushed out. And when it comes to heart rate response, the two things you want to be really thinking about are cardiac output, which leads us right into our next point. But with that heart rate, keep in mind again, the goal is better performance. Heart rate goes up, so be it, but you better be clear about your theoretical ideal of where you want the heart rate to not go higher than. Set a ceiling. Don't set floors for heart rates. Tell your athletes don't go above 140, don't go above 150, don't go above 160, but don't tell them to get up to a certain point. That's not something we want to see happening in sports or any type of performance. And of course, well, I should say too, citing and attaching resources. A lot of you are actually getting better with your citing of research journals, peer-reviewed research journals. Some of you are still citing only the textbook, and you're losing points every time you do that. And you're also losing a few points, at least 5, if you don't also attach or provide a link specifically in your response, your post, to that article, so we could all look at it if we want to see what research where you're getting your information from. Okay. And as far as for week 5, coming on forward now, referring to the heart, cardiac output. When we talk about heart rate rising, what's really happening is the body is having difficulty getting proper nutrients, proper oxygen to the tissues. Specifically, stroke volume cannot be maintained. So consequently, what happens is the heart rate increases because stroke volume is actually dropping. When stroke volume decreases, heart rate goes up. So you're not seeing an efficient heart at that point. You're actually getting more and more inefficiency, essentially. Not bad, not good. Be careful with those terms. But the fact is, we're becoming less and less efficient. Perfect world, incredible output, low heart rate. High stroke volume, low heart rate. High cardiac output. Doesn't always happen. That's okay. Of course, that heart rate, we want to see it go down at the bare minimum following any set that we're going to be repeating. We're planning on doing this a second time or third time or fourth time or whatever number of times you're planning on doing it. If they can't get that heart rate back down below 120, if they can't get back to breathing normally within 90 seconds or less, then whatever we're doing is too high of an intensity and or they're done and shouldn't do anymore. Okay. Heart rate variability. You can't measure heart rate variability unless you get a polar heart rate monitor, which can actually measure heart rate variability. And by the way, I highly recommend the polar FT60 or polar FT80, and there are some other higher level watches that will tell you they'll measure heart rate variability. That is highly, highly recommended to get. Heart rate variability is otherwise something only an EKG or an ECG can measure when it comes to being in a hospital, right? And at rest, a fit person, theoretically, should have a lower resting heart rate, right, than a non-fit person. And the fit person will have a higher heart rate variability at rest, a lower heart rate variability under exertion, because that person is going to respond very quickly cellularly to stress, respond quickly and return to normal very quickly. So you'll see some variability at rest, whereas the unfit person will have no variability. It'll be like a metronome, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, with no change relative to small stressors. When the stress becomes consistent at higher levels, the fit person, their heart rate now, their variability becomes normalized and becomes low variability and is more bum bum, bum bum, bum bum. That unfit person is going to have significant variability, bum 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 bum, jumping all around during high exertion. Something you can actually use as a subjective measurement of someone's readiness for the activity today. Don't be confused with heart rate, cardiac output, intensity, all those things, and expecting it's always going to be the same, right? We all know a good athlete on a bad day won't respond well. Likewise, a bad athlete on a good day can respond better, all depending on numerous factors. Take all these factors into account. Finally, when it comes to breathing, when someone's increasing their breathing rate, what's really happening is the skeletal muscle involvement is becoming such a significant effort requirement that you're seeing an uptick in the heart rate, an uptick in the breathing rate. Consequently as well, the ventilatory control or response as well. Some people often say, try to control your breathing. The best way to control your breathing is finding the right intensity of the exercise. It's fine if you're trying to work on someone's psychological focus in general and talking about focus on your breathing, focus on control while you're moving. That is great. But if you're really looking for the ideal physiological response and you want to control breathing, you have to lower the intensity in this moment and probably increase the recovery period between sets to ensure that that breathing rate is normal. I often get my athletes or former athletes all asking me the question of, how should I breathe when I exercise? My response, yes. They say, okay, what do you mean? What I mean is, I want you to breathe and not think about your breathing. I want you to focus on your form, focus on how well you're moving, focus on what I'm asking you to do as far as the output we're trying to get here, how fast we're trying to be, focus on the movement you're engaging in. I don't want you thinking about your breathing, because what you're doing is adding more complexity to the exercise and less likely to have ideal form. The performance is the goal, once again. How you breathe, the heart rate, everything else is an indicator of someone's ability or inability to perform at the level we want. If their facial expression changes, the form is bad. If their breathing increases substantially, the form is bad. You've already missed it. Be clear on the goal. Not bad, not good. It's all feedback, but we want to really use these applications we're learning in this exercise physiology course to better our coaching and to better the well-being and the performance of our athletes. Good luck in week 5. Email me or call me if you have any questions, anything else I can do for you.